Go. Hello, I'm here with Megan Murphy. She is a writer and a journalist. She founded and is the editor of the website feministcurrent.com, and she hosts a podcast called The Same Drugs, which disappointingly enough, I found out that it is not about drugs. It
Sorry.
I know that it's from a Chance the Rapper song, which I like. So there we go.
Yep.
Megan, thank you for joining the show.
Thanks for having me.
So I'd like to begin by sharing something that we both have in common in that we both recently left Canada. I left because I finished school and my student visa expired, and you because for more complicated reasons. So would you like to share them with us?
Yeah, I mean, there's several reasons that I left Canada and did not come back. I mean, it's always nice to leave Canada and go check out other places in the world, go on vacation. I enjoy traveling for work and things like that. I left Canada 1 year ago, so January 2021. I mean, at that time, really, I felt like I had to get out on account of the COVID restrictions, which seemed to be ongoing and increasing. And it was sounding like the Canadian Liberal government, Justin Trudeau's party, was going to start preventing people from traveling. And I was very worried that I was going to get trapped there. I was miserable, and like as far as COVID restrictions went, I actually was not too severely impacted. I didn't lose my job. I was able to work online. I wasn't trapped in an abusive relationship. I was comfortable in my apartment. I had access to things that I needed: food, water, heat, etc. But I just, I was miserable. I was super depressed. I was super anxious. I couldn't deal with the lack of human contact and the lack of freedom. And yeah, I was really concerned about the way that our charter rights were being removed. And so I left and I came to Mexico, and I kind of left just in time because, flights were starting to get canceled. It was harder and harder to get out. And, Trudeau did change the regulations shortly thereafter to, force people to have to quarantine for 2 weeks when they came back. And eventually you had to get a vaccine to get on a plane. You were threatened with having to stay in a quarantine hotel at your own expense to return. And yeah, I had booked an Airbnb for 5 weeks thinking, oh, maybe I'll extend for a little longer, maybe a couple months, 3 months. And I did continue to extend and then found a long-term rental. And, at a certain point, I realized that I was much happier living in Mexico and I didn't want to go back. And there was a number of other things that were going on too. Politically, I found Canada to have become quite terrifying, to be honest. The progressives that I knew in Vancouver, my friends, my friend group, my social circles, they were very monolithic in their views and very judgmental and, I would even say bigoted in their approach to people who were not like them. These people, I think, believed very much that they were very inclusive, good people, and that the people they were judgmental of were bad people, and therefore they deserved the hatred that they imposed on them. But I think that is what bigotry is, intolerance for other people's viewpoints. And this is a group of people in Vancouver, at least, who are relatively privileged, not just globally, but like in terms of in Canada, they're middle class or upper class people, highly educated, at least one university degree, decent jobs. They're not really lacking for anything except that, they've taken it on themselves to dictate what everyone else's politics should be, what our approach to so-called marginalized populations should be. And yeah, like it didn't feel safe for me in a variety of ways. I've gotten lots and lots of death threats in my, as long as I've been speaking out about controversial issues in terms of my work. I've been threatened in public in Vancouver. I was, recognized in public. And, but more than that, I had so many friends who were ostracizing me and saying horrible things about me, or trying to, make me feel bad for who I am, essentially, make me feel bad for holding the views that I have and saying those views in public, for defending women's sex-based rights in public, specifically for challenging gender identity legislation in public. And saying, like, oh, well, my friends don't like it, and now you can't come to this, and now I feel uncomfortable, as though like it's my job to make them feel comfortable by shutting up about the truth or about what is right. As far as I was concerned, I was fighting for the truth, and I was fighting for women's rights, and I don't care if it makes people feel uncomfortable, because it's the right thing to do. And I was just becoming more and more disappointed and frankly really angry at the people around me and what I saw was happening to Canada. Trudeau had already passed Bill C-16 back in 2017, which is Canada's gender identity legislation, which changed everything in terms of our approach to gender identity, and specifically men who identify as women in Canada, allowing them access to women's change rooms, women's prisons, women's transition houses, so on and so forth. But he was also looking to pass a couple of bills that would limit or criminalize even so-called online hate speech. So essentially speaking out against whatever the government deems to be correct is considered hate speech. So, what I do, challenging gender identity ideology, would be considered hate speech by the government. My free speech would be considered hate speech. And, I don't consider my speech to be hateful, but it just got really terrifying for me. And I was like, am I going to end up in jail? So I left, and I didn't go back, and I don't plan to go back.
So obviously more complex reasons than just the weather's better where you are now. Yeah, I do hope the weather's better there.
The weather is better, but not.
Yeah, I have a.
I don't know how I ever survived the winter before.
I have a friend who used to live in Vancouver. He's now in Peterborough, Ontario, and he would basically pretty much say the same thing that you are saying right now. I think he voted Liberal for pretty much all of his life. He even voted for the younger as well as the older Trudeau, and now he feels basically disillusioned by his former loyal party that he's been loyal to, and because of all of the reasons that you've stated. And I'm sure he'd be pretty excited that I'm actually speaking to you right now. I'd like to throw a quotation to you. This is from the Spectator magazine, and it goes, quote, "The truckers' convoy is the most inspiring thing I've seen come out of Canada in my life. I'm for one proud of Canadians, and I hope their numbers force the truth out of Trudeau and the Canadian media, which is that the country's handling of COVID has been unconstitutional, cruel, destructive, and an economic disaster. Time to get back to reality, whether the powers that be like it or not." Close quote. Of course, the author is yourself, and I basically agree with everything that you've said, and I am quite supportive of the truckers from afar. But I've also had a couple of friends who are a bit more left wing than myself, and they basically bought into the canard that they are white supremacists and racist and bigoted and anti-science, the whole nine yards. And I like to hear you hear your thoughts on this notion that I have. It seems to be that in I've had my experience in Canada, and I think that this is the same in Western countries, where it seems that when white people get angry, it doesn't matter. But of course, when the so-called BIPOC, which they seem to count me as one of them, get angry, then their outrage is seen as a cry for justice. But when, the whites get angry, even legitimately or not, they are seen as, well, bigoted. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the left has categorized people in this, as it's been called by many others, this kind of hierarchy of oppression that is ahistorical and doesn't make any sense on a global level because, of course, the BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, it's grouping in basically every single person in the entire world who isn't Caucasian into the same group, which makes no sense because people of color throughout the world have had very different histories and have very different personal experiences. They live in different places under different, political and cultural and social circumstances. Some are middle class, some are even wealthy. Some have political power, many do not. Many are poor, of course, many are working class. But, same thing for white people. I mean, this privilege hierarchy, which puts white people inherently and always at the top, completely invisibilizes poor and working class white people who are all over the place, especially in America. And, I think you're right. It's like when white women, you may have noticed in the past couple of years, get angry, they're called Karens, right? So they're treated as though they're shrill and whiny and essentially have no right to be angry about anything, but deserving of mockery and derision and sometimes even hatred. And you can see in the approach to the truckers versus the approach to, for example, Black Lives Matter from these same leftists. So the same leftists who I know in Canada, or who I've seen speaking online about these various activist movements, were wholly supportive of Black Lives Matter, no matter what they did, no matter the looting, no matter the destruction, no matter the violence, no matter the burning down of stores, small businesses, the threatening, the destruction of neighborhoods and communities. It didn't matter what they did or said. They were righteous in their fight for whatever it is they were fighting for. Some were fighting to defund the cops, apparently, which is an incredibly stupid and misguided and naive aim, as far as I'm concerned. But now we have these truckers, these working class, primarily men, primarily white men. It's true. I mean, the demographics of Canada are that, most of the population is white, like 70%, I think. And then, of course, there's many South Asians, there's Indigenous people, there's a small minority or a smaller minority of Black people, especially compared to the US. We don't have nearly the same amount of Black people and Latino, for example. But they're fighting for our charter rights. They're fighting against totalitarianism. And just because they chose the so-called wrong political narrative, according to these progressives, and conveniently they were white, they could be accused very easily of being white nationalists or Nazis, or bigoted, which of course they all were accused of being. And there's really no evidence of any of this. I mean, we're talking about tens of thousands, maybe even at this point, hundreds of thousands of people across Canada, because there's not just the convoy of truckers that went to Ottawa. There's also all of their many supporters in Ottawa who showed up all of the people along the way as the truckers drove through all the provinces from BC to Ontario, who came out onto the streets, onto the highways to offer their support. There's been rallies in other provinces, in Quebec and Victoria, for example. And, you know, there's many Americans now who are supporting the Freedom Convoy and these rallies and protests. So, you know, to treat all of these people, which is a wide diversity of people of all races and classes, I think, as white nationalists and Nazis is nonsensical. But, you know, I've been following the media coverage pretty closely, and I've been following what people are saying on social media. And all I've been able to see, there was one photo of one Nazi flag, one swastika. There was one photo of a truck that had a Confederate flag sticker on it, I think. And then that's it. You know, like I literally, like an hour ago, read an article published at tvo.org, which I guess is a progressive site. And the guy writing it said, you know, our streets have been taken over by swastikas and Confederate flags. And it's like, that's weird that you guys all keep saying this, but none of you can even find a photo to demonstrate that. You can find the one photo, I guess, of the one swastika, which no one knows where it came from still. Nobody knows whose flag it was, where it was, why it showed up there, if it was connected to the trucker convoy. Like it could have been a plant for all we know. Same thing with the Confederate flag, but also like one Confederate flag sticker on a truck, like who cares? It's representative of nothing. And moreover, the organizers condemned both of these things. They said that these symbols are not welcome at the rallies, and if they show up, these people are going to be removed. They're going to be kicked out. And yet the leftists and the Canadian media and our politicians, of course, are still repeating these lies. It's really amazing. It's just, you know, it really blows my mind that we've gotten to this point where the truth just doesn't matter at all. No one cares, well, not no one, but these people clearly do not care about the truth. They care about the narrative. Justin Trudeau doesn't care about the truth. He cares about his narrative. All these progressives online claiming that these people are all Nazis don't care about the truth. They haven't looked into it. You know, they haven't looked for evidence. They're just reading what their friends are posting on the internet. And that, you know, they're reading these false media reports, I suppose, or perhaps listening to Justin Trudeau. But I've been looking at the coverage for over 2 weeks. You know, I've been looking at video after video after video of hundreds of thousands of people. And there's nothing like that anywhere across the entire country. How can that be? How can all this footage exist of the rallies showing these people who are like happy and joyful and diverse and celebrating and loving Canadians, and even who are treating counter protesters with love? You know, I saw a video today where a counter protester showed up in a mask and a sign saying "Go home, terrorists." And, you know, all the people who were part of the protest, the convoy, were like, we love you, we love you. Like they were just super nice and loving towards this guy. Like there's no hate there. And within all this footage, these leftists claiming this is a hate movement can't procure one video evidencing all this horrible harassment and hate and bigotry that's happening. It's ridiculous. And yet they still cling to the narrative.
Of course. Here's you know, during my 4 years of being a sort of Canadian international student, I find that one thing I do not like about the people of Canada, and I hope you do not take offense to this statement, but
Right.
even some Canadian friends of mine agree that the people of Canada, especially the college-educated ones, like to pretend that they are more progressive than they actually are. And of course, there's one example of it that comes to mind are these two really great musicians, Neil Young and Joni Mitchell. And yeah, this is a music show, so obviously I have to mention them. So of course you know what's going on. They pulled their music catalog off of Spotify because they do not like Joe Rogan, and it disappoints me a lot because they're great musicians, and I like them a lot. Neil Young, especially, he's the reason I made it out of high school, and I thought these people are basically the Woodstock generation. They were the counterculture. They were for free speech and free love and free expression and everything. But now, I mean, there's this MMA guy who talks to certain contrarian doctors, and they got their panties all in a bunch. And so, what's up with that?
I mean, I was really, well, I shouldn't say I was really disappointed. I'll just say I was disappointed because I've been disappointed so many times by so many musicians that I loved and looked up to over the years, that what I determined was that most musicians are not very smart and shouldn't talk about politics. They're very good at making music, and I love their music and I appreciate their music, but I don't necessarily care what their opinions are about politics or activism or much of anything else. I mean, we live in this culture where we treat celebrities, so famous actors, famous musicians, famous artists, as though, you know, they're we ask them to speak on things that they're not qualified to speak on. Like, I don't really care what some actor has to say about feminism or Black Lives Matter or, anything else really. They're good at acting, so they can do that. And every once in a while, of course, there's actors and musicians who come along who do have something informed and intelligent to say about these issues. I mean, look at what like Joe Rogan is doing. Look at what Russell Brand is doing. I mean, I suppose I could put comedians in a different category because I think you do have to have some level of intelligence to be a good comedian, actually. But, Joni Mitchell is actually one of my favorite musicians of all time. I've been listening to her since I was a kid. My mom had her records when I was a kid. And so I've been listening to Joni Mitchell since I was, like as long as I can remember. And one of my favorite albums of all time is Blue. I think she's an incredible musician. But she doesn't necessarily have informed opinions about these issues, and neither does Neil Young. And their decision to pull their music from Spotify proved that. What is disappointing is that they were part of this cultural moment where they were fighting war and they were fighting injustice, and they were the rebellious ones and they were the radical ones, and somehow they've become the institution. The position that they've taken against Joe Rogan and in their efforts to have him removed from this platform. And really what they're trying to do is cancel him. They're trying to ensure he can't speak and do his work anymore and interview these people, which would be a travesty. They're these old school leftists, these old school radicals and rebels who are siding with corporate America and the politicians in power, the Democrats in power, Joe Biden and his crew. They're siding with Big Pharma. That's crazy to me. Why would Big Pharma have our interests in mind, our best interests in mind all of a sudden? Big Pharma's motive has always been profit. And that doesn't mean that there's not like awesome pharmaceutical drugs that are life-saving and that are really helpful to people. But Big Pharma also produced Oxycontin and didn't care. That drug killed thousands and thousands and thousands of people across America because they chose to lie about the drug on their label, knowing that people were getting addicted and overdosing and dying because they wanted to make a bunch of money. But all of a sudden we're supposed to put our trust in Big Pharma. And it just, to be honest, it just makes me think these people aren't very smart. Like, I know it sounds mean, but it's just like, okay, well, you're kind of dumb. Like, you're really not thinking this through. You're just glomming on to the side that you think you're on. And that's what I think most of these leftists and progressives, whatever you want to call them, whatever they call themselves, who, for example, have taken this position against the truckers, or who, for example, have taken a position against women who fight for women's sex-based rights and in favor of gender identity legislation, who sort of automatically vote Democrat without really thinking about it, and automatically hate Trump and all Trump supporters and anyone who voted Trump. It's just about sides. Like, it's just this tribal mentality, right? Well, this is my tribe and this is what they think and this is what they say. So this is what I think and say. It's the same as being in a cult. It's no different.
Mhm.
You know, this is what we're doing. No questioning it, no thinking about it. And if you do question it or think about it, you're ostracized or worse.
Definitely. Yeah, and I like to zero in on this Joe Rogan versus, I guess, the trans ideology for a bit. Of course, there's the obligatory disclaimer in that Joe, myself, and you, we all want the best for transgender people. We wish them well. We wish them to have equal treatment and not being discriminated at work or on renting a home. So basically, the rights that we are having, and plus, if they need any sort of medical intervention so that they can so that to help them with their gender dysphoria, then so be it. They should have that support. But we we all have an issue with the trans ideology, and many of the trans activists espouse this ideology, and it it's a I mean from what I've read, it's a pretty much an incoherent mess. But they've so far, what I've noticed is that they are much more vicious in their attacks on women, especially women like yourself, than say guys like Joe Rogan. And they, one example in mind is this label that you've been tagged with, TERF, or trans exclusionary radical feminist, which at first sight I find ridiculous because if saying that there are two genders and men and women are different in their body constitution makes you a radical, then call me a radical for all I care. And they go even further and further, as I've observed in their, I guess, anti-woman stance, in that they object to the term woman. They call them pregnant people and even pregnant bodies or menstruating bodies, and not to mention the various death threats sent to yourself and J.K. Rowling. Suddenly, she's canceled now because she's not good enough trans inclusionary feminist. And there are a lot more stuff. The trans women who are basically X-Men in sports, winning all the medals, and especially in MMA, beating up all the women, and the trans women who are convicted rapists in prison, which is abhorrent. But nevertheless, the trans ideology, the trans activists espousing these ideologies, stand behind these, you know, these trans women or X-Men, and it makes it begs the question: does the trans ideology have a woman problem? And I hope you can help me answer that.
It does seem to be very misogynistic, the so-called trans rights movement. The activists are very hateful and even violent towards women. Women, countless women have been threatened just for showing up at events organized to discuss the conflict between women ideology. It's happened at my events, it's happened at events in the UK, it's happened at events in the US. And it's, it's funny because it's not, I've seen a lot of feminists who are critical of gender identity ideology in any case, talk about this as a men's rights movement. I think that's correct. And they've talked about, connected to that, I think they sort of see the reason for the attacks on women within the trans rights movement, defended by those who defend gender identity ideology as led by men. And I don't think that's entirely true because, I've been attacked by, young women who are proponents of gender identity ideology. I think that this movement at its root came from men. I think, I've tried to think about this a lot because people ask me all the time, like, where did this come from? Where did these ideas come from? And I think that there's more than one thing. One of which being that I think that there's a lot of older men, kind of middle age or post middle age, who transition, who are autogynephiles. So they have a fetish. They're turned on by seeing themselves in women's clothing or imagining themselves as women, or, by the idea of being seen as women. And they decide to transition. And a lot of those men are quite powerful. They have money or positions of power in various institutions. And I think in order to legitimize their preferences, practices, beliefs, they had to put forward this idea of gender identity in the same way that we understand homosexuality. So they tried to put forward this narrative of born this way, which is how this idea of trans kids came about. Like, it's like, some people are just born trans, some people are just born in the wrong body, which is ridiculous. Nobody's born in the wrong body. You're just born in the body you have, and like, kind of too bad. I mean, there's like various things you can do. You can get cosmetic surgery, you can try to be healthy, you can try to take care of yourself, you can try to work out, but you can't literally change your biological sex. That's just how you were born. Sorry. And and on the other hand, like, part of it I think was gender theory, which came out of academia and could be said to have come out of women's studies, because of course all these women's studies departments that were once centered around things like women's writing and women's history, women's activism for women's rights, the fight for women's rights, turned into this kind of like postmodernist faculty, these postmodernist departments that were focused on theory rather than women's real lives and what women were doing out in the world and what was actually happening to women. And it turned into a focus on gender theory. And then the women's studies departments, of course, turned into gender studies departments. When I was in women's studies, like, I have a BA and a master's degree in women's sexuality and gender studies, which at first was just women's studies. And then they changed the name of the department. And around that time in 2010, across Canada and the US, all the women's studies departments essentially became gender studies departments, or some version of gender, sexuality, women's studies. And the word woman was taken out of most of those departments and was taken out of all of the kind of coursework. Like, when I went to look back at the gender, sexuality, and women's studies department at Simon Fraser University, which is where I got my BA, my master's degree, none of the courses have the word women in them anymore. It's all like gender this, gender that, so I think I've gotten way off track, but that is to say that it's like, I think that it's a misogynist movement in terms of how it's played out, but I don't know necessarily that it was planned that way. But I think it's part of that trend that we sort of talked about a bit earlier, which is like, at one point we treated white men in this way. And in retrospect, I think this was wrong, although I think I probably participated in this to a certain extent before I knew better. And I regret that, but you have to learn somehow. Where it's like, oh, you're a white man, you can't talk. White men are inherently the most privileged people in the world. And now the target's white women. So women who are called TERF are also called white feminists, and white feminists are garbage, according to leftist narrative. And you're the most privileged, so you don't get to say anything. It's all identity politics. It's like, you're this, so you get to speak. You're this, so you don't get to speak. But of course, when they say, like, you're BIPOC and therefore you can speak to issues of race, and everybody else has to listen and agree, and you can't challenge that person, you can't challenge that person's activism. That is not really just about skin color or ethnicity. It's about politics. It's like, actually, your voice is most important because you agree with our politics. So it's really quite racist in many ways. It's like, me, a white leftist, gets to decide what you, a person of color, gets to say, because if you say the wrong thing, then you don't count as a person of color anymore, conveniently. Anyway, I don't know if that answered your question, to be honest, but
It does, and more. I think to answer my own question, I think it does, and it has become that way, and it might just remain that way, and I hope that it will be its downfall. The arguments that the trans rights movement put forward do not hold water. I fail to believe that we have to alter or abolish our whole thinking of sex and gender just to appease what is really a minority of people. I mean, an important minority, but still a minority. And we are forced to do so almost at gunpoint. Again, you've mentioned the Bill C-16 law, and the sudden immersion of when you're filling in forms for, say, administrative purposes. In the gender section, there's always the third option aside from male and female, being non-binary or prefer not to specify. And I've always had a tough time understanding what non-binary people are. Like, and when people say that there are more than two genders, well, I would ask them, well, what, how many others there are, and they fail to specify.
Yeah, I mean, non-binary doesn't mean anything. Non-binary, like, if we're talking about gender, which supposedly we are, I mean, it wouldn't mean anything if we were talking about sex either, because there's only two sexes. There's male or female, and then of course there's some people who have very, 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 very tiny minority of people who have intersex conditions. But that doesn't actually make you an entirely other sex. Like, an intersex condition isn't a third sex. Usually with intersex conditions, the individual actually has like a fairly obvious sex, but then they have various other, like their chromosomes, or like, they have ambiguous genitalia or something. Like, I'm not an expert on intersex conditions, but I do know that there's not just one. It's not like you're just intersex. It's like you have an intersex condition, and there's a whole bunch of different ones that it could be. But anyway, we're talking about gender. So if we're talking about gender, we're talking about masculinity and femininity, which are just a set of stereotypes, roles, personality traits, stereotypical behaviors, things like clothing preferences. And nobody, if we're talking about that, nobody's binary. Like, I'm a woman, but my gender is not binary. Like, I'm not all feminine. I'm a mix of various, personality traits. I have likes and dislikes, some of which could be labeled feminine, many of which could be labeled masculine. Like, I'm not a very feminine person. Like, I may appear very feminine, but in terms of my personality traits, like, I'm quite argumentative and aggressive. I'm certainly not passive. I'm not nurturing. I don't consider myself to be overly emotional or, irrational. And lots of things that I like to do would qualify as masculine. Also, like, I like lifting weights. Like, I like boxing. Like, I don't really enjoy doing girly things. I hate the color pink. So, I mean, technically I would qualify as non-binary, but I think that also means that, again, everybody like, either non-binary is nothing, because we're all non-binary. Or we're all non-binary, like, and there's no such thing as cis, which is what they call who don't identify as transgender or non-binary, because supposedly you identify with the gender you're born with. Well, I don't. I think part of the confusion and the problem is that people conflate gender and sex. So I always try to clarify that when I'm talking about sex, I'm just talking about what's physical, your biological sex, your body, whether you're male or female. And then again, when I'm talking about gender, I'm talking about this idea of masculinity versus femininity. I think mostly when people are identifying as non-binary, they're either, you know, teenagers going through the same phase that all teenagers go through, where they want to identify with a certain group and kind of feel special. It's just that when I was a teenager, that was like, you know, I dress like a skater, so I'm a skater, or like I hang out a skid corner, so I'm a skid, or like I dress like grunge, you know, like it's just trying on, you're trying to find out who you are. So you're trying on different outfits, different friend groups, different kinds of music. And you want to fit in too. You want to fit in with a group, and you want to feel like you're kind of like special and important and original, when really, you know, you're not that special and important and original. You're just kind of like a regular person like everybody else. And especially, you know, nowadays people like to feel like they're very, very special, important individuals. But yeah, like, but whereas before that was just like viewed as a regular thing that all teenagers kind of go through, like a phase, now it's being treated as this like legitimate thing, this like medical thing, or like a political thing, right? Like this is actually who you are. And it's ridiculous. I mean, you should just be like, okay, sure. Like, I mean, and none of it matters. Like, what matters is if you want to have like, if you're a girl and you want to cut your hair short and you want to wear men's clothes, then you should just be able to do that. I mean, you can change your name if you want to. You can have whatever likes and dislikes you want to. I mean, especially in places like Canada and America, you can't be persecuted if you're a girl and you want to wear boys' clothing, or if you're a lesbian. I know that it can be hard still, you know, like I don't want to deny that people get picked on a lot and that homophobia still exists in various places. But I mean, you're not going to be prevented from being who you are or thrown in jail for being who you are, unless, of course, you have political opinions. But like, that's what we should be telling kids and people in general, but especially kids. Like, you know, okay, if you feel like a girl, that doesn't mean anything. You're female, that's fine, but you know, be who you are, wear whatever you want, but not pushing them to get medical treatments, to go on hormones, to get surgeries, not pretending as though these identities somehow make you not female or male. I mean, I think that's quite confusing and obviously damaging in a number of ways.
All right. Well, it obviously adds to your credibility as a genuine transphobe, and me as well. I want to pivot to a topic that you've also been quite vocal about, and that is the curtailing, or the I guess the your your stance against the consumption of pornography, or the curtailing, not the banning of pornography. I actually read your piece on feministcurrent.com, and it actually gave me pause, and eventually actually changed my stance on the matter. Of course, my previous position has always been that of a good libertarian, in that you can do whatever you want in private without harming anyone. But then, of course, I saw that the production as well as the consumption of pornography is harmful to both women and men, and obviously more so women. And porn producers, the people who are the behind the scenes doing pornography, filming it, definitely have a woman problem. So And I worry that because tech is so ubiquitous right now, everyone has a phone, and I worry about how you give a kid a phone, and of course, as teenage boys, we have these urges, and they want to see women in little or no clothing, but then they are not prepared for how the increasingly extreme lengths that certain porn categories and subcategories would go through. Like they of course they would get the wrong impression that that is how sex works, and it's that's not good. But I wonder, have you had a, say, a more libertarian or more pro pornography consumption minded people come up to the show or ask you to debate with them about the matter?
Um, I have talked to a lot of people who have a more libertarian approach to prostitution and pornography over the years. And I tend to disagree with them, and I tend to feel as though they misrepresent prostitution and pornography, but also that they misrepresent arguments against prostitution and pornography. Speaking for myself personally, I'm not advocating to ban pornography. As much as I would like for pornography not to exist, I
Mhm.
first of all think that's impossible. And second of all, that I think it would be unwise because I oppose censorship, and I don't know where that would lead. Like I'm always asking people who do say we should ban pornography. I'm like, well, what specifically are we banning? Are we banning, sex acts on screen? Are we banning, paying people to portray sex acts on screen? Are we banning specific acts? Like I think everyone does, for the most part, know what pornography is.
Mhm.
You like that thing, like, when you see it, I can't remember who said it was like a judge in some court case. It may have been part of the Dworkin McKinnon ordinance or something.
Um,
But anyway,
I'll know it when
is
I
that
see
true?
it,
Do you
right?
know?
Is that it?
Yeah, yeah. But anyway, like I think it's true, but in as far as legislation goes, you have to be more specific than that.
Mhm.
um, and And I think that ordinance that McKinnon and Dworkin put forward was actually quite good, because what they were trying to do was to enable women who'd been harmed in pornography to sue those who harmed them, who exploited them, to sue those pornographers. And I think that kind of thing would force pornographers to be more accountable. A main problem with pornography is exploitation, and the exploitation happens because people make billions of dollars off of pornography. So they can use a girl or a woman who's maybe desperate for income, or maybe doesn't know any better, or maybe at that point in her life thinks this would be a good idea. um, they can use her, and the industry can kind of chew her up and spit her out, and then they can profit from her image and continue to profit from her image for all of eternity. Doesn't matter what she feels about it, doesn't matter what she felt at the time. One of the things that angers me about men who watch pornography is that they don't know what they're watching.
Mhm.
They can tell themselves, oh, well, it's content sensual, so it's okay. And it's like, you don't know what's going on for this woman. I'm sure she's not enjoying herself. Most of the women in pornography are not enjoying themselves. They're
Yeah.
acting. But they might feel like they might be being abused. They might be uncomfortable. They might be feeling pain. A ton of people in pornography, not just the women, but the men also, are dealing with mental health problems and addiction. A lot of the women in pornography, and of course in prostitution, have histories of sexual abuse and molestation. They're not mentally healthy people. They're not, and to just say, oh, well, they consented, and to know nothing about her story or her context. Um, I think I think you're really lying to yourself. But yeah, I mean, the other issue, like there's so many different issues. And I find that often when libertarians approach the issues, they'll take that approach also. Well, adults can do whatever they want if there's consent. And it's like, yeah, adults can do whatever they want when there's consent. But I think that it's also important to have conversations about the broader implications and repercussions of production and consumption, which are immense. Kids are growing up watching pornography and learning about sex through pornography. It's unavoidable at this point. In the past, boys would have to seek out, a magazine and go hide somewhere to look at it. Now, as you say, it's just on your phone, and you don't even have to look for it. It's just there.
Mhm.
It's impossible not to see pornography. I see pornography all the time, and I don't look for pornography, and I don't want to see pornography just because it's on Instagram or Twitter. And it's gross, and it's been totally normalized. And I think it messes with people's brains. I think it warps the way men see women and treat women and what they expect out of relationships and out of sexual relationships. I think it prevents intimacy. I think it breaks trust. I think that a lot of women feel not just upset, but quite traumatized by their partner's porn use, and then they're gaslit by their partners, and society around them, because they're told this is fine and this is normal and just a fantasy, and yet their partner is essentially engaging in sex acts on screen, not in real life, but still on screen with another woman. And yeah, it's tough because there's no easy answer, and people want easy answers, and feminists want easy answers, and there aren't easy answers. It's a conversation that we should be having, and we should be having more honest conversations about it. And what I came to is I was like, haranguing people isn't going to help. Like telling men, you're a sexual abuser because you use pornography and you're misogynist and you're a bad man, that's not going to get through to most men. They're going to shut off and they're not going to listen, and they're going to think you're crazy. I want to actually get through to people. I want men to understand why pornography is harmful to them, to their partners, to their relationships, why it hurts women. And not all men are going to understand. There's going to be some assholes who just don't care. They don't care how women feel. They don't care if that woman's being abused. They don't care how their partner feels. But at the end of the day, the way to make people understand is really through having compassionate, open, honest conversations. Like that's the best way. I don't mean it's going to work on everybody. We're not going to always get our way. That's not how it goes. But that is what we have to do.
What I learned over time is how deeply unsexy pornography is. I mean, if it is a fantasy, then it's a very poorly constructed one. It does not simulate sex. It does not initiate or inspire desire between men and women, or even men with men or women with women. It the way I see it, I mean, there's a difference between what's pornographic and what's erotic. What's erotic leaves a lot to the imagination, and what's pornographic, well, it isn't. I mean, we view, say, Botticelli's Venus and Marilyn Monroe differently than, say, I don't know, Mia Khalifa, when we see whatever she's in now. And I wonder if you can give any insights on that. What makes something that, do you have that distinction between what's erotic and what's pornographic?
I don't think I actually do have a very good definition of erotica versus pornography. And it's something that I should try to work on. I mean, it's something that I have thought about over the years, but I haven't been able to come up with a good way to differentiate, really. But I agree with you. Like, I think that erotica can be really sexy, and like I would never want to like full out cut sex scenes out of movies, for example, or TV, or even music videos. Like,
Mhm.
I think that porn culture has obviously infiltrated all aspects of media, especially advertising, and especially things like music videos and pop music. And, of course, television and movies as well, to a certain extent. And I think it's kind of the same thing. It's like, see something and I can say, this is porny. This is pornographic imagery. And then I can see something and be like, this is sexy, this is erotica.
Mhm.
And could put into words what the difference is. I do feel like I know it when I see it, though. But I agree with you. Pornography isn't sexy. I find pornography disgusting. And I feel like that's sort of a hard thing to say in this day and age, because when you say that, people think that you're prude. They think that you're some kind of like Christian right winger and you hate sex.
Mhm.
And they tell you that you hate sex because they label you anti-sex. And I'm not sex. I'm very pro-sex. I love sex. And I and I think that because I like sex and it's important to me, that's why I'm so critical of pornography. And that's why I do hate strip clubs and prostitution and porn to a certain extent. There's lots of other reasons too, including the abuse that happens to the women in those industries. But I think sex is a really important thing and a really intimate thing. And I don't like that it's been turned into this dehumanized thing that's like, it's just bodies, because it's not just bodies. It's totally about your relationship to that other person and about things like trust and about respect and about valuing the other person and caring about how the other person feels and what they want, and that you're not being watched. Like, to me, the idea, it's like, I like sex, so why would I want other people watching me? Why would I want to film it? Why would I want to turn it into a consumable product? I feel like that would totally ruin it. Like, I feel like if you're enjoying sex, it's because you're not thinking about being watched. And I feel so bad for young women and girls today, because I think that, and even women my age, just from talking to them, I know that they're thinking about how they look and they're acting out porny scenarios, and they're thinking about how they like, they really, they're seeing themselves as though they're in a porn movie and they're performing this, which would totally take away from your ability to feel pleasure. Um, and I think that's just sad. Like, I don't think you should be thinking about what you look like or whether you look like this girl in a porn movie, which isn't even real, and she's not enjoying herself, and she probably feels uncomfortable and her back hurts, and she's been doing this for how many more hours, like, the whole situation is just depressing to me. And yeah, girls are growing up in this culture where objectification is totally normal, and they think that in order to be attractive to boys, they have to objectify themselves publicly on social media and put these pornified, like hyper filtered, posed photos online, and then they get likes, and this is supposed to be where they get their self-confidence and validation from, which they won't. This isn't going to build self-confidence for them at all. There's a million ways in which this industry and this porn culture is harmful to men and women and boys and girls and society and relationships. And I think it's really sad and depressing.
Um, what what is I
Can I
mean,
just interrupt you for half a sec?
please do.
I do have to get, sorry, I have to get going soon because I have to start a live stream shortly.
Of course.
Sorry.
Yeah. We'll only have like a few minutes left, but yeah. I would agree that the what seems to me so prevalent today is how women and girls think of themselves as brave and courageous, and other women and girls egg them on because they post photos where they wear as little clothing as possible, and they they show their bodies and everything. And I start to sound like a Christian Puritan now, but I really think that if you do respect your body, that is not something you should do. I mean, it's their choice to do so, but it's not respectful. But here's
Mhm.
I only here's a quick question to end the show. Should Elliot Page, formerly Ellen, star in a new movie? Would you watch it?
Oh, probably not, to be honest, but not because I would want to like boycott her. I feel like it would probably be a crappy movie. But I don't know if I could stand it. I mean, looking at her is just brutal. She looks sick. Like, I feel bad for her. I think that she's struggling with some really serious mental health issues. And I feel mad that people have egged her on in terms of this belief that she can become a man and that she should destroy her female body in order to do so. But I don't know. I sort of suspect that if Elliot Page were in a movie, it would be as a trans person, or there's be some kind of like trans politics involved, and it would drive me insane. But I mean, who knows? Never say never. Certainly I wouldn't boycott it, but it's unlikely that that would be a draw for me in terms of the kinds of films that I want to watch. I'll say
Yeah,
that.
yeah, I wouldn't enjoy it either, but with that evidence of misgendering caught on video and audio, thank you, Megan Murphy, for being on the show. You are amazing and you're the best.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to talk with you. I'm sorry to have to cut that off sort of suddenly. I hope that we got what we needed to out of that.
Oh, it's all right. Well, have a good day.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.